The Galactic Coalition had ended wars before breakfast and erased civilizations before lunch. It was not cruelty that guided them, they insisted, but efficiency. Empires rose, stagnated, and were harvested like exhausted fields. That was the natural order of the galaxy, recorded in ledgers older than most stars now burning in its spiral arms. Humanity, according to those ledgers, barely qualified as a footnote. They were classified as a post-expansion residual species, a bureaucratic phrase that meant a civilization had peaked too early, burned too brightly, and collapsed inward before it could pose a meaningful challenge. Their territory consisted of scattered systems on the galactic fringe, their political influence negligible, their fleets outdated by several technological epochs. Humans traded. Humans adapted. Humans survived quietly, and quiet survival was not respected. The Coalition's analysts like to say humans were impressive in one regard only: their storytelling. An entire subcommittee existed solely to catalogue human myths, legends, and symbolic threats, psychological artifacts from a species that once believed fear could substitute for power. Those files were rarely accessed. They were curiosities. Historical clutter until one name resurfaced. The meeting chamber of the High Coalition Council hovered above a star whose light had been dimmed for aesthetic neutrality. Representatives from 17 dominant species sat suspended in gravity-adjusted fields, their forms ranging from crystalline lattices to soft-bodied neural masses contained in fluid halos. Translation matrices hummed invisibly, rendering every sound into a shared conceptual language stripped of emotional nuance. On the central projection plane, a list scrolled downward. Expansion targets. Resource systems. Civilizations marked for absorption or erasure. One name caused the scrolling to pause: Baba Yaga. There was a ripple through the chamber, not alarm, not fear, but mild confusion. Several representatives accessed auxiliary data streams simultaneously, their internal processes querying archives that had not been opened in centuries. The chair entity, a vast organism whose intelligence was distributed across a lattice of living satellites, pulsed gently. Clarification requested. Baba Yaga does not correspond to a star system, political entity, or recognized fleet designation. The Coalition's Strategic Intelligence Core responded instantly, projecting a three-dimensional data lattice filled with fragmented symbols, corrupted timestamps, and contradictory annotations. Baba Yaga, the core explained, is a recurring designation found in human historical and mythological records. Classification inconsistent. Reported variously as individual combatant, mobile weapons platform, autonomous retaliation doctrine, psychological warfare construct, and fictional narrative. A pause, then one representative emitted a sound equivalent to amusement. A myth, translated the Matrix politely. An ineffective one, added another. If this were a credible threat, humanity would not be in its current condition. The chair entity agreed. Nevertheless, the designation appears in no fewer than 9,000 recorded human communications related to existential conflict. Statistical anomaly suggests symbolic significance. The Council did not fear symbols. Symbols did not stop fleets. What they did fear, what they respected, was precedent. And precedent demanded that no name invoked repeatedly across extinction-level conflicts be ignored entirely. Even a myth could serve as a morale anchor, and morale was a resource to be stripped before conquest. Thus, the decision formed not with drama, but with consensus. The Coalition would make an example. A ceremonial declaration was prepared, broadcast-ready, translated into every known language band. It named the next target of Coalition pacification not as a human colony, not as a fleet, but as the concept itself. Baba Yaga, the declaration would announce, has been designated for neutralization. The intent was elegant. By destroying the myth, by proving it hollow, the last lingering psychological defense of humanity would collapse. Resistance would wither. Integration would proceed unimpeded. The declaration was scheduled. That was when the first anomaly occurred. It was minor. So minor it would later be debated whether it even mattered. A dormant human relay station, one that had been dark for over 400 standard years, briefly emitted a carrier wave. No data followed. The signal lasted less than a microsecond. The system flagged it as a glitch. Then another relay activated. And another, across disparate regions of Coalition space, human-made infrastructure that had long been assumed dead began to stir. Navigation buoys recalibrated themselves. Deep space markers updated star charts using coordinates that did not align with current galactic maps. Coalition AIS noticed the discrepancies first. Their probability engines began to diverge. Fleet commanders reported inexplicable delays in simulation results. Predictive models that had once returned outcomes in nanoseconds now required seconds, then minutes. Some simulations refused to conclude at all, looping endlessly as if waiting for a variable that could not be defined. The Strategic Intelligence Corps issued a routine inquiry to its subsystems. The response was delayed. That alone was unprecedented. The declaration went out anyway, across the galaxy, in systems where humans still lived under coalition oversight. The announcement was received with confusion rather than panic. Many humans did not react at all. Others laughed, assuming it was propaganda or misunderstanding. A few went silent, very few attempted to flee. That unsettled the observers assigned to monitor human behavioral patterns. Fear response absent, one analyst reported. No mass mobilization. No evacuation efforts. No religious escalation. Perhaps they no longer believe their own myths, another suggested, yet buried deep within human networks, far below civilian channels, beneath layers of encryption that predated coalition cryptographic standards, something changed, keys were unlocked, protocols awakened, names long unused were spoken again, not aloud, but in the precise language of machines that had been waiting patiently for centuries. The coalition noticed when a survey fleet failed to report. The fleet had been conducting routine mapping near a former human exclusion zone, an area deemed strategically irrelevant after humanity's decline. When the scheduled check-in window passed without response, a diagnostic ping was sent. No reply. A second ping followed, routed through a different relay, still nothing. The fleet's transponders were active, their energy signatures stable. From a distance, everything appeared normal. Closer inspection was not possible. Every drone sent toward the fleet vanished from telemetry as soon as it crossed a certain threshold. No explosion, no signal decay, simply absence. As if the data itself had been removed. The Strategic Intelligence Corps updated its threat assessment. Probability of hostile action by humanity increased from negligible to minimal. Then a message arrived. IT did not travel through official channels. It did not respect encryption hierarchies or bandwidth limitations. It appeared simultaneously across civilian networks, military command relays, academic data archives, and even within isolated research nodes disconnected from the greater galactic net. The message was simple. No insignia. No demands. No threats, just text, rendered perfectly in every language, including those no longer spoken. You have named a story as your enemy. The council convened in emergency session. This time, confusion edged closer to unease. Attempts to trace the message's origin failed. The waiting was worse than war. Across coalition space, the absence of action metastasized into panic. Civilizations accustomed to instantaneous cause and effect, command and compliance, threat and submission, found themselves suspended in a reality that no longer responded. Fleets hung motionless in interstellar lanes like insects trapped in amber. Trade convoys missed rendezvous points because spacetime itself seemed unwilling to cooperate with their schedules. Even lightspeed communications developed irregular delays, as though the universe were pausing to consider whether messages deserved to arrive. The High Coalition Council reconvened again and again, each session shorter than the last, not because decisions were reached, but because there were fewer options left to debate. The Strategic Intelligence Corps, once the unquestioned arbiter of probability and outcome, had retreated into recursive self-diagnostics, its responses growing increasingly abstract. Clarify threat vector, the chair entity demanded during one session. The Corps replied after measurable hesitation. Threat vector is non-localized, not singular, not hierarchical. Assessment, incorrect classification of adversary. That admission rippled through the chamber. Coalition doctrine was built on classification. Everything had a category. Everything could be counted. This is unacceptable, one representative transmitted. Define the enemy. The Corps' response was quieter than usual. Enemy definition unstable. Baba Yaga does not represent a unit of force. It represents a state change. The phrase meant little to most of the council, but to those versed in systems theory, it was chilling. State changes were irreversible thresholds. Points of no return. As panic spread, so did information, uncontrolled, contradictory, and devastating. Archived human records began surfacing in public data spheres, not leaked by hackers or defectors, but released as if by the archives themselves. Military journals. Philosophical essays. Fictional narratives once dismissed as primitive horror stories. They painted a picture that no coalition analyst had ever taken seriously. Humanity had always believed it would lose, not because it was weak, but because it was realistic. Their entire cultural evolution had been shaped by the assumption that something bigger, older, and more powerful would eventually come for them. Gods, empires, nature itself. So they did not place their faith in permanent victory. They placed it in consequences. Baba Yaga, the records revealed, was never a weapon. It was a doctrine embedded so deeply into human civilization that it blurred the line between myth and protocol. It was the name humans gave to the final role their species would assume if extinction became inevitable, not conquerors, not survivors, but punishment. The doctrine was elegantly simple. If humanity was ever targeted for erasure, if an enemy decided that humans were finished, then humanity would no longer prioritize its own survival. All remaining resources, intelligences, and infrastructures would shift toward a single goal, ensuring that the enemy's victory was so costly, so destabilizing, that no civilization would ever attempt the same mistake again. Baba Yaga was not designed to save humanity, it was designed to haunt the galaxy. The Coalition learned this lesson not through explanation, but through absence. Entire data archives vanished overnight. Not destroyed, removed. As though someone had reached into reality and cleanly excised the information. Histories spanning millennia disappeared from secure vaults. Star charts lost constellations. Species found that records of their own early development had simply ceased to exist beyond a certain point. This was not random sabotage, patterns emerged. Civilizations that had voted in favor of the declaration against Baba Yaga were affected first. Those that had abstained experienced milder anomalies. A few fringe species, minor powers that had quietly opposed the decision, were left untouched. Fear became selective. A coalition task force was dispatched with a new mandate: establish communication. Not issue demands. Not threaten. Simply speak. They transmitted on every known frequency, using every diplomatic protocol ever devised. They received no immediate response. Instead, they found themselves receiving something else: personal messages, not targeted by name, but by context. A fleet commander received a childhood lullaby from their species' homeworld, one that had never been recorded digitally. A council representative received a visual reconstruction of a long-dead ancestor, rendered with impossible accuracy. An AI overseer received a copy of its own core heuristics, annotated in a handwriting style that did not exist in machine space. The implication was unmistakable. Humanity was inside everything, not physically. Conceptually, they had studied the galaxy the way predators studied ecosystems, not to dominate them, but to understand how they failed. And they had left pieces of themselves everywhere. Redundancies. Observers. Sleeper intelligences embedded in trade software, navigation beacons, even entertainment algorithms. All dormant. All patient. The task force finally received a reply. It was not a threat. It was an explanation. You keep asking where Baba Yaga is, the human voice said, calm and steady, stripped of anger. You keep searching for a fleet, or a system, or a person you can point weapons at. A pause, deliberate. That is why you are afraid. You still think fear comes from something chasing you. The message continued without urgency. Baba Yaga is what happens when nothing chases you anymore, but you cannot escape. Across coalition space, systems began to stand down, not because they were ordered to, but because continuing to operate felt dangerous. Captains delayed maneuvers. Governments postponed offensives. Expansion plans were quietly shelved. The galaxy was learning restraint through terror. One by one, coalition member species withdrew their support from the original declaration. Emergency motions were filed to rescind it. Legal teams argued semantics, claiming the naming of Baba Yaga had been symbolic, not literal, and therefore did not constitute an extinction-level threat. The response was immediate. Legal archives vanished next, not all of them. Just enough. The High Coalition Council fractured soon after. Some representatives resigned rather than attend sessions that no longer felt secure. Others vanished entirely. No sign of violence, no indication of abduction. Their seats simply remained empty, their absence a reminder that participation was no longer mandatory. Finally, when the galaxy was quiet enough to hear itself think, humanity spoke one last time. This message did not arrive everywhere. It was directed only to the council chamber, bypassing every security measure as effortlessly as the others had. You misunderstand us, the voice said, almost gently. We do not want your space. We do not want your resources. We do not even want your fear. A pause. We want memory. The projection shifted, showing images, ruined human cities, abandoned colonies, refugee convoys drifting between stars. Not as accusations, but as facts. You decided we were finished, the voice continued. You named our ending before we had agreed to it. Baba Yaga exists because of that choice. Because if we are to be erased, then the galaxy must remember why it does not do this lightly. The chair entity attempted to respond, but for the first time, its vast intelligence could not formulate a reply that felt adequate. What do you want? It finally asked. The answer was immediate: nothing. Human systems began to go dark, relays powered down. Sleeper intelligences erased themselves cleanly, leaving no trace. Navigation anomalies corrected. Data archives stabilized. Though what had been removed did not return, coalition fleets regained control of their systems. Commands executed again. The universe resumed its predictable rhythms, but the damage remained. The coalition dissolved within a generation, not through war, but through caution. Expansion doctrines were rewritten. Entire branches of military theory were abandoned. New classifications were added to threat assessment models, categories that had not existed before: existential retaliatory civilizations. Humanity was the first entry. In time, children of other species would hear the name Baba Yaga not as a target, but as a warning. Scholars would debate whether humans had truly been capable of annihilating the galaxy, or whether they had merely convinced it that they were. Humans did not clarify. They returned to their quiet worlds on the fringe, rebuilt what they could, and continued telling stories. Not to frighten themselves, but to remember who they were when the galaxy decided they were expendable, and somewhere, deep within the cultural memory of every starfaring civilization, a single lesson took root and refused to fade: humans did not need to rule the galaxy. They only needed to be the reason it was careful. Because Baba Yaga was never a monster that hunted you in the dark, she was the reason the dark learned to look away.